I only needed somewhere safe to sleep. Then that old steel hoop sounded wrong.
She was 21 and homeless. No apartment. No family room. No safe address. Just a canvas duffel and $9 she had hidden inside the lining of an old winter coat. And with that $9, she bought an abandoned oak rain barrel cooperage outside Peoria, in Peoria County, Illinois, a place that had fallen off county maps in 1968. Half the north roof had sagged 6 inches. The brick chimney had split above the flashing. The county condemned it October 3, 2022, with demolition planned for the following spring. But beneath a fallen roof beam lay a hand-forged steel hoop with a sealed double wall no one had opened in decades, and inside it waited enough to change her life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Sylvie Anne Mercer had been measuring exits her whole life without knowing it. As a child in Pekin, she noticed which porch steps squeaked, which drawer stuck in winter, and how long a room stayed tense after adults stopped speaking. At 9, she built a birdhouse from peach crate slats and cut the roof overhang just deep enough to keep rain from the entrance. Her father, Daniel Mercer, disappeared by degrees after she turned 11, fewer dinners, fewer shirts in the closet, then a forwarding address no one used. Her mother, Elaine, kept bills beneath a ceramic hen and answered hard questions by wiping the same clean counter twice. The one adult who never hurried Sylvie was her grandfather, Amos Mercer, a retired cooper with broad thumbs and a white scar across one knuckle. Every Saturday he took her to his shed near the Illinois River, where oak shavings curled beneath the bench like pale ribbons. He taught her to sight down a stave, feel grain direction, and listen when a draw knife changed pitch near a knot. At noon they ate cheddar sandwiches from wax paper while he sharpened edge tools on an oil-dark stone. He never praised speed, he praised fit. When 2 pieces met cleanly, he tapped the joint once and nodded. Pressure tells you whether the work was honest, Amos told her, tightening a practice hoop around 6 scrap staves. She remembered because he did not mean only wood. Under pressure, a bad fit opened. A true one held. He died when Sylvie was 16. By the time the family settled his few belongings, the cooper's tools had been sold in mixed auction lots, his notebooks misplaced, and the old brass-headed hoop hammer gone without anyone recording who bought it. Sylvie received only his wool cap, still faintly scented with cedar. At 19 she moved in with Evan Rusk, who spoke softly in public and saved his cruelty for closed rooms. He read her bank statements over her shoulder, timed grocery trips, and called her forgetful until she checked every receipt twice. As his gambling losses grew, money vanished from their joint savings. He explained each withdrawal as if she had agreed. He never struck her. He made the apartment smaller in other ways, missing keys, dead phone chargers, long silences that made her apologize first. The eviction came on November 14th, 2022. Sylvie returned from a double shift at a diner to find her green suitcase upright beside the apartment door. One wheel snapped off. Evan had chained the door. Her mother stood in the hallway beside him, arms folded over her brown coat. Sylvie asked where the savings had gone. No answer. Then she asked whether she could stay with her mother for one night. Elaine looked down at the broken wheel. 8 words. Sylvie waited for her mother to look up. She never did. Evan slid a grocery bag through the chained opening. Inside were 2 shirts, socks, a toothbrush, and Amos's wool cap. The door closed. The chain clicked loose only after Sylvie had reached the stairs. For 6 weeks she moved wherever warmth remained public. 2 nights at Peoria's bus terminal ended when security recognized her coat. She slept upright in an East Peoria laundromat until the owner began locking the restroom after midnight. In Bloomington, she spent 3 nights near the back of a late-closing cafe before a manager gently told her she could not stay. Her cash fell from $23 to $16, then $12. She stopped buying coffee and carried hot water in paper cups. By Christmas week, she had $9.41. She kept the $9 flat inside her coat lining. A 50-cent roll at a church supper and 25 cents for a photocopy. She decided not to make left 4 warm coins in her palm, one grey afternoon at the Peoria Public Library. She had gone there for heat. Near the periodical's desk, a corkboard held county notices and estate sale cards. One sheet hung crooked beneath an advertisement for used snow tires. County disposal, structure and lot, as is tax foreclosed. Below it was an address west of the river and a minimum quitclaim transfer fee of $9. The description read, former Mercer rain barrel and Cooperage works. Sylvie read the surname twice. She copied the parcel number onto a discarded printer slip and found the location in an atlas. The property lay beyond the last regular bus stop, near an old county road through fields and walnut stands. She counted the money again, folded the notice into quarters, and tucked it beneath Amos's cap. The next morning, she bought no breakfast. She walked toward the county transit stop, carrying everything she owned and $9 that could either become a deed or disappear before nightfall. By dusk, Sylvie would be standing before a building everyone else had already decided was finished. The bus carried Sylvie west through the last grey neighbourhoods of Peoria, past machine shops, frozen drainage ditches and fields lying flat beneath a December sky, the colour of old tin. She rode to the end of the route, then walked nearly 9 miles with a duffel strap cutting into one shoulder. Darkness caught her before she reached the county road. She slept that night in an open-sided hay barn outside Hannah City, tucked between square bales while the temperature fell to 19 degrees Fahrenheit. Every hour or so she woke and flexed her toes inside damp socks. By morning, the wind had sharpened. She followed Route 116 east until a narrow county road bent toward a settlement that scarcely deserved the word town. There was Kessler Hardware with seed sacks stacked behind its front glass, Doris May's Cafe beneath a faded Pepsi sign, Harlan Feed and Grain beside the tracks, Boyd's Barbershop with one red chair visible through the window, and the Walnut Street Pharmacy, where a brass clock above the door had stopped at 4:17. The Peoria County Clerk's satellite office occupied 2 rooms in a former bank branch. Sylvie entered carrying the smell of hay and cold wool with her. Behind the counter sat a woman with silver hair, held by 2 black pins and reading glasses on a beaded cord. Her nameplate said Martha Bell, Deputy Clerk. Martha looked at the folded county notice, then at Sylvie. "You understand the building is condemned?" "Yes." "Ma'am." "Yes." "Ma'am." "No county-inspected water service is active." "Yes." "Ma'am." "And demolition authorization begins in spring, unless the violations are corrected." Sylvie held the woman's gaze. "Yes." "Ma'am." Martha removed her glasses. Sylvie reached beneath the loose seam of her coat lining and placed a 5, 3 ones, and 4 quarters on the counter. Martha counted it without comment. She pushed forward a quitclaim deed, a liability acknowledgement, and a blue ballpoint chained to the desk. Sylvie signed slowly. The brass county stamp came down with a mechanical crack that seemed far too large for so small a transaction. Martha gave her directions while the ink dried. "County Road 16 past the old quarry turn. You'll see a collapsed corn crib on the south side. Take the gravel lane opposite it. Half a mile, maybe more. The lane forks at 2 black walnuts. Keep left." Then she stopped. Her thumb remained on the deed. Sylvie looked up. The room became very still. Martha leaned back. "Amos Mercer from Pekin." Sylvie nodded. The clerk studied her face as though comparing it with something held at a distance. My father knew him. Not well. Bought 2 cistern barrels from him in the 70s. Said Amos could make white oak hold water without a smear of pitch. Sylvie said nothing. Martha turned the deed over and read the parcel description again. This place was Mercer property once. Sylvie felt her fingers tighten around the edge of the counter. The same family? I couldn't tell you how close. Martha tapped one line with a short fingernail. The tax records go back farther than what we keep here. But Mercer Rain Barrel and Cooperage Works was the name on the original industrial assessment. Martha slid the deed toward her. This time, her voice was softer. Outside, Sylvie folded the paper inside the plastic sleeve that had held the county notice and tucked it beneath her shirt. The walk from town took another hour. County Road 16 narrowed past bare fields, then entered a shallow rise where walnut trees leaned over a drainage creek. Near a mailbox painted with a red cardinal, an old man in coveralls was splitting kindling beside a shed. He stopped when Sylvie passed. His black and white farm dog trotted to the ditch, barked once, then stood watching her. "You headed to the Mercer place?" the man called. Sylvie stopped. He rested both hands on the axe handle. She nodded. The old man looked at her duffel, then toward the trees. That was all. The dog followed her another 50 yards before turning home. The cooperage appeared gradually through the bare branches. It was larger than Sylvie had imagined, a long timber frame workshop, perhaps 40 feet wide and nearly 70 feet deep, with weathered white oak siding over portions of brick foundation. A steep roof of cedar shingles had gone black with age, its north slope sagging around a broken rafter line. The chimney rose from the western wall, split near the top and capped with a rusted sheet metal hood. Above the wide loading doors hung a board sign, Mercer Rain Barrel and Cooperage Works. Only half the painted letters remained. Sylvie stood in the gravel lane until the cold reached through her shoes. Then she unlocked the padlock with the key Martha had given her. The door resisted first. She put one shoulder against it. Something scraped inside, then released, and the heavy panel opened 6 inches with a breath of air that smelled of wet oak, mouse nests, iron rust, and the sweet green rot of old sawdust. She stepped through. The front room held the remains of the business office, a counter tilted toward the floor, pigeonholes swollen shut by moisture, and a cast iron stove furred red with rust. Her boots pressed grit into warped boards. Somewhere overhead, water dripped at long intervals into a metal pan. Plink. Silence. Plink. She tasted dust when she breathed through her mouth. Behind the office, double doors opened into the workroom. There the building changed scale. Roof trusses disappeared into shadow 20 feet above her. Broken oak staves lay in collapsed bundles against one wall, some curved and silvered with age, others split lengthwise where years of damp had entered the grain. Steel hoops leaned in nests along the floor, their rusted arcs resembling enormous abandoned springs. An anvil-shaped cooper's stake protruded from hardened mud near a drainage trench. Sylvie rubbed a finger along one stave. Oak dust came away soft as flour. She smelled mildew beneath it. Near the rear wall stood a brick fire pit where barrels had once been heated upright over controlled flame. Above it hung a pulley block with a length of rotted cable still threaded through the wheel. Sylvie touched the cable, and one brittle fibre snapped against her thumb. She heard something move in the rafters. A pigeon burst from darkness. Its wings hammered the air so suddenly that she ducked. Then the building settled again. At the back was a small room with a sink, a hand pump, 2 shelves, and a narrow window clouded by mineral deposits. She worked the pump handle. It groaned once, then twice. Nothing came. She tried again. Deep beneath the floor came a hollow metallic cough. No water. By the time the light began fading, she had chosen a place to sleep in the front office where the ceiling appeared soundest. She swept one rectangle of floor with a broken broom, laid flattened burlap sacks beneath her coat, and used the duffel as a pillow. Dinner was half a heel of bread a woman at the bus station had wrapped for her the day before. Sylvie chewed slowly. The temperature inside the building fell with the sun. Wind found cracks between the siding boards and moved across the room in thin, precise currents. She learned their paths by holding her hand in the dark. One crossed the floor near her ankles. Another slipped beneath the office door. A third came through a missing pane above the counter. She moved twice before finding a corner where the air was almost still. There, wearing Amos's wool cap and both shirts beneath her coat, she lay on her side and listened. The roof ticked as frozen moisture contracted. A loose hoop shifted somewhere in the workroom with a faint iron note. Water struck the pan. Plink. Minutes later, another. Sylvie reached beneath her shirt and touched the plastic sleeve containing the deed. $9 had not bought safety. It had bought responsibility. For the first time in weeks. However, no one else had a key to the door. She closed her eyes. Strength does not lie in each stave, but in the steel hoop that binds them together under pressure. For the first 3 days, Sylvie worked outward from necessity. The hand pump finally gave water after she primed it with 2 borrowed jars from the old man down the road, whose name she learned was Earl Voss. The first flow came brown, then cloudy, then clear enough to boil. The outhouse leaned 5 degrees toward the creek but remained usable once she replaced one hinge with baling wire. Inside the cooperage she learned the floor by sound. 3 boards near the office groaned low and harmless. One plank beside the fire pit snapped sharply under weight. She marked it with chalk. On the 4th morning she walked back into town. Kessler Hardware smelled of kerosene, pine shelving, leather gloves, and the faint mineral odor of galvanized nails. Behind the counter stood Warren Kessler, a narrow man with one cloudy eye and a pencil tucked permanently above his right ear. He listened without interruption while Sylvie explained the condemned building, the chimney, the well, and the $9 now gone. Warren looked toward the front window. "No, sir." He took down a ledger with a cracked green cover. "I can open you a small account. Materials only. You sign every purchase. You miss 30 days. We talk before you buy more." Sylvie hesitated. He wrote Mercer, ILV, in careful block letters. Then he bent beneath the counter and handed her a grease-stained book called Home Repairs for Farm and Workshop, printed in 1956. "Free," he said. "Nobody buys books with photographs that ugly." She carried back only what she could justify, a chimney brush for $6.85, 20 feet of fiberglass rod for $4.20, stove cement for $2.10, a pair of work gloves for $1.55, and a galvanized bucket for $1.25. Warren added 2 worn dust masks without entering them in the ledger. The chimney came first. Sylvie read the section twice before climbing onto the lower roof with rope tied around her waist and anchored to a walnut trunk. She removed the rusted cap, then lowered the round wire brush into the flue 1 rod at a time. The brush caught 6 feet down. She did not force it. She twisted clockwise, lifted 2 inches, lowered again. Something broke loose. A black sheet of creosote slid down the chimney and struck the stove throat below with a sound like gravel poured into a drawer. For 4 hours she worked from the roof, adding rods until the brush reached the bottom, then drawing it upward in short strokes. She climbed down, opened the cleanout, shoveled soot into the galvanized bucket, and repeated the process. By late afternoon she had removed nearly half a bucket of flaky creosote, 2 bird nests, and the dry skeleton of a starling. The cracked mortar above the flashing remained a larger problem for later. But the flue itself was open. She waited until morning before testing it. The first fire was no larger than her 2 hands. She crumpled brown paper beneath pencil-thin oak scraps, then laid 3 dry stave offcuts across them with space for air. When the match took, the paper folded inward in blue-edged flame. Smoke hesitated beneath the stoveplate. Sylvie watched the seams, then the draught caught. The flame leaned cleanly toward the throat. She fed it 1 piece at a time. By noon, the cast iron had warmed enough to make the office smell of old dust and heated metal. She set a dented saucepan on top and cooked oatmeal with well water and the last spoonfuls from a paper packet Doris May had slipped into her coat pocket when she passed the cafe. It was the first hot meal Sylvie had eaten alone behind a locked door. She held the bowl between both palms until it stopped steaming. That afternoon she began taking inventory of the workroom. She did not try to count everything. Too much had rotted beyond use. She chose what mattered. Against the east wall stood a shaving horse with 1 leg split but its clamping head intact. Beneath a bench lay a Cooper's jointer plane nearly 5 feet long, its iron orange with surface rust. 3 wooden crozers hung from pegs, used for cutting the grooves that received barrel heads. A rusted windlass lay beside the fire pit, its cable drum still turning when she leaned into it. There were 2 hoop drivers shaped like blunt wedges, an iron compass large enough to span a barrel head, and a bundle of white oak staves tied with wire so old it broke when she touched it. Under the rear rafters, half, buried in collapsed timber, lay the steel hoops. Most were ordinary flat iron bands, badly scaled with rust. One was not. It was wider than the others, nearly 4 inches across, and hand-forged rather than rolled. Its surface carried hammer marks beneath the corrosion. 1 section had been folded back on itself in a thickened overlap, then closed with what appeared to be an old brass brazed seam. Sylvie almost left it there. Then she remembered Amos tapping joints with 1 knuckle. Fit had a sound. She lifted the nearest hoop with both hands and struck it lightly using the wooden handle of a broom. Clang. The second gave the same open iron note. The wide hoop answered differently. Thunk. She struck it again. Thunk. Not solid. Not open either. She dragged it into better light. The hoop was heavier than its size should have allowed. She compared it with another band of nearly equal diameter, lifting each from the ground by 1 edge. The ordinary hoop rose easily. The forged one pulled hard against her shoulders. Along the thickened section, green corrosion traced 1 narrow line beneath the rust. Brass. Sylvie fetched a wire brush and cleaned no more than 6 inches. The seam emerged slowly. It had been disguised beneath scale and soot, brazed so carefully that from a distance it looked like reinforcement. Near one end was a circle no larger than a nickel. Cedar. A small wooden disc had been fitted into the iron and darkened with age. She pressed it. Nothing. She tried the edge of a nail. The disc moved inward perhaps 1/16 of an inch. Sylvie stopped. She returned to the old repair book, though she knew it would contain nothing about secret compartments. What she wanted was not instruction, but time enough to avoid damaging whatever mechanism lay inside. At dusk, she used a drop of lamp oil around the cedar disc. She waited 20 minutes. Then she pressed again, with the rounded end of a punch found beneath the bench. The disc slid inward. Somewhere inside the folded steel came a faint click. A narrow panel released along the brass seam. Sylvie sat back on her heels. She did not pull it open immediately. Instead, she cleaned the edges with a soft brush, removed packed rust from the lower corner with a wooden splinter, and worked the panel back and forth less than half an inch until the metal moved without grinding. Only then did she open it. Inside the hoop was a cavity long enough to hold a man's forearm. The first bundle was wrapped in waxed linen. Sylvie lifted it carefully. Beneath that sat a narrow parcel tied with cotton cord. Then a small tin box darkened almost black. At the bottom lay a brass-headed hoop hammer, its handle wrapped separately in oiled cloth. She knew the tool before she uncovered it. The head was heavy, rectangular, and made from solid yellow metal worn smooth at the striking face. Along one side, letters had been hand-engraved. Strength does not lie in each stave, but in the steel hoop that binds them together under pressure. Sylvie placed the hammer across her knees. For several minutes she did nothing else. The waxed linen bundle contained tools, small enough to preserve, a curved cooper's knife, 2 narrow chisels, a marking gauge, and a palm-sized template of thin brass used to check stave curvature. Each had been oiled before storage. Surface tarnish marked them, but no deep rust. The second parcel held paper, not money. A hand-sewn booklet wrapped in dry hide. She read only the first page. Watertight stave proportions, Mercer shop notes. Below the title were tables of measurements, grain instructions, and small diagrams showing how much belly to leave in a stave relative to barrel diameter. Sylvie closed it. The tin box came last. It had no lock. Inside were 4 paper-wrapped rolls, loose coins in small cloth sacks, and an envelope sealed with yellowed wax. She did not touch the envelope. She opened the first paper roll. $20 bills. Old ones, but not ancient. The second held 50s. The third and fourth held hundreds, arranged flat and bound with paper bands carrying handwritten totals. Sylvie counted on the office counter beneath the light of a kerosene lamp. Once, then again. Cash totaled $36,420. The cloth sacks added more. Morgan silver dollars, Walking Liberty $half, Indian head gold eagles, and a small group of pre-1933 St. Gordon's double eagles, each wrapped separately in tissue. She did not know their collector value. She counted only the denominations that brought the face value total of money in the compartment to exactly $37,500. At the bottom of one sack lay a military medal suspended from a faded ribbon. She turned it over. The inscription gave a name she did not recognize yet, and the year 1918. Sylvie placed it beside the sealed envelope. $37,500. She counted the cash a third time because numbers were safer than meaning. The result did not change. She carried the money back to the workroom, returned every bill and coin to its original wrapping, and placed them inside the steel compartment again. The tools she left on a folded flour sack beside the office stove. The brass hammer remained near her bedroll. The sealed envelope stayed unopened. Outside, night had settled over the walnuts. Sylvie walked to the hand pump, filled the bucket, and carried it toward the drainage creek behind the cooperage. Meltwater moved beneath a skin of shore ice, black in the center and silver where moonlight reached it. She sat on a flat stone. For 6 weeks she had counted quarters before spending them. Now, there was more money inside the ruined building than she had ever seen in one place. She did not make a plan. She did not calculate repairs. She watched the water move around a submerged branch and join itself again downstream. Behind her, the cooperage stood dark, except for one small window where the stove fire breathed orange against the glass. The letter could wait until morning. Strength does not lie in each stave, but in the steel hoop that binds them together under pressure. Morning came pale through the mineral-clouded window. Sylvie heated water on the stove, washed her hands, and set the sealed envelope on the office counter. The wax cracked when she lifted the flap. Inside were 6 folded pages covered in narrow blue-black handwriting. She knew the shape of the capital M before she knew why. Amos had written his shopping lists that way. The letter was not his, but the hand belonged to someone who had learned beside the same table. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this, then the shop has outlived the people who believed they owned it. My name is Eleanor Ruth Mercer. In March of 1967, Dr. Samuel Carver at Methodist Hospital in Peoria told me I had pancreatic cancer. He was careful with the words. I appreciated that. A person who has worked with sharp tools knows there is no kindness in pretending an edge is dull. I have hidden here what I could preserve: money, patterns, tools, and the measurements that were never written in the trade catalogues. The money is not a reward. It is time. Use it carefully. Our family began making wet Cooperage in Illinois with Thomas Mercer, who came from Cincinnati to Peoria in 1858 and opened a barrel shed near the river. His son Jacob Mercer, born in 1861, moved the work west after the flood years and built this shop in 1887. Jacob's daughter Clara Mercer, born in 1878, learned every station except the forge and kept the accounts when men said a daughter should only sweep shavings. Her son Walter Mercer, born in 1902, carried the work through Prohibition, lean harvests, and the war years. Walter was my father. My husband, Henry Bell Mercer, died in France in 1918 before he ever saw the walnut trees full grown. Some grief becomes furniture. You stop noticing its weight because you have learned how to walk around it. The shop closed as a working cooperage on October 17th, 1936. After that, we repaired cisterns, patched dairy tubs, and made occasional rain barrels for farms that still trusted oak more than galvanized steel. For more than 30 years, the real trade here has been silent. If you mean to bring any of it back, begin slowly. For a rain barrel, use straight-grained white oak and reject any stave with runout that crosses more than 1/4 of its width. Leave the middle of each stave fuller than the ends. For a 30-inch belly, start near 7/8 of an inch at center and ease toward 5/8 at the heads, adjusting by grain. Do not scorch the wood. Warm the raised shell over a small fire until the inside surface reaches roughly 160 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Sponge with hot water. Turn constantly. And tighten the windlass in stages. 5 minutes of patience can save 50 years of leakage. When setting the head, cut the crows clean and shallow. A groove too deep weakens the stave. A groove too high invites seepage. For lime washing storage barrels, 3 parts clean water to 1 part fresh slaked lime is enough. Stronger is not always better. And when you drive the final hoops, listen. Oak speaks before it splits. You may wonder why I sealed all this in iron. Because wood moves, money disappears, families scatter, paper burns. But a well-forged hoop carries pressure around the whole circumference. No single stave bears it alone. That is the only inheritance I trust completely. Not land. Not cash. Work honestly fitted to the next pair of hands. I do not know your name. I do not know whether you are family. That matters less than people suppose. If you opened this carefully, if you stopped before forcing the seam, if you looked at the tools before looking at the money, then perhaps you already understand more than blood can guarantee. Behind the rear door, 15 paces toward the creek, you will find a granite marker beneath the eastern walnut. The mark carved there belonged to Clara. Keep it uncovered. There is one lamp in the office cupboard with a brass wick wheel. It was Jacob's work lamp. Light it once for those who worked here before you. Then use your own light. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. August 22nd, 1967. Sylvie read the letter twice. The second time, she slowed over Clara's name. When she finished, she folded each page along its original creases, matching the worn edges exactly. She returned the letter to the envelope but did not reseal it. Then she put on her coat. Behind the rear door, the ground sloped toward the creek beneath crusted snow. Sylvie counted 15 careful paces from the threshold. At the eastern walnut, nothing showed. She knelt. Using the side of her glove, she brushed snow from the roots, then scraped away leaves frozen together in a black mat. Her fingers struck stone. The marker was rectangular, no larger than a paving brick. She cleared the surface. Carved into the granite was a simple Cooper's mark, 2 curved stave lines held by 3 horizontal hoops, with a small C beneath them. Clara. Sylvie rested her palm against the stone. It was colder than the air. Back inside, she opened the office cupboard. At the rear stood a squat kerosene lamp beneath 30 years of dust, its glass chimney unbroken. The brass wick wheel turned only after she worked a drop of oil into the spindle. She cleaned the burner, trimmed the wick, filled the font with the small amount of kerosene Warren had let her add to her account. At dusk, she struck one match. The flame climbed narrow and blue, then softened to amber. Sylvie set the lamp on the old counter. For the first time, she noticed how many people had carried her farther than $9 should have allowed. Martha Bell had stamped the deed and then quietly slipped the unused quarter from the transfer fee into her desk drawer instead of handing it back, saying only that county accounts preferred whole numbers. Earl Voss had brought 2 jars of pump water and never asked when she would return them. Warren Kessler had opened a ledger to a homeless woman with no collateral, and Doris May had wrapped oatmeal in paper, as though feeding someone were too ordinary an act to deserve gratitude. Small things: a jar, a book, a paper packet, a line of credit written in pencil. Most lit lives did not turn on grand rescues. Sometimes they turned because one person refused to add another ounce to the weight someone was already carrying. So let me ask you something before we go farther. Can you remember one small kindness someone gave you when you were tired, frightened, or nearly out of choices? Not the largest gift, just the one that arrived at the exact moment you needed proof that you had not been left entirely alone. That night, Sylvie placed the brass hoop hammer beside her bedroll. The curved knife, chisels, marking gauge, and stave template rested on a folded cloth within reach of her hand. She put Eleanor's letter beneath Amos's wool cap. Then she lay down near the stove while Jacob's lamp burned low on the office counter. For the first time since arriving, she did not sleep with her shoes on. The first snow came on December 3rd. 6 inches settled across the roof before dawn, outlining every sag and weakness Sylvie had been avoiding. She carried the repair manual to the office stove and read the roofing chapter 3 times before climbing the ladder. The north slope measured 24 by 36 feet. Allowing for overlap and waste, she calculated she needed roughly 24 bundles of cedar shingles, 2 rolls of 30-pound felt, and nearly 12 pounds of galvanized roofing nails. Warren Kessler extended the account without comment. When she arrived to collect the first load, he placed a roofing hatchet on the counter. "My brother's," he said. "He won't need it." Sylvie turned the worn handle in her hand. 2 days later, Earl Voss appeared beside the cooperage carrying a ladder and a coil of rope. He had roofed barns for 38 years before his knees ended the work. "I can't pay you," Sylvie said. They worked 11 days. Earl taught her to sister a split rafter by bolting a soundboard alongside the weakened timber, then transferring the load gradually before removing the temporary brace. They snapped chalk lines so each shingle course stayed true even when the old roof beneath it wandered. Sylvie drove nails too cautiously at first. Earl touched one with his thumbnail. Sylvie reached for the hatchet. She did. By the 7th day, she could seat most nails in 3 strokes, one to start, little We are starting something that I think is going to stay with you for a long time. Picture this one to drive. Vone light finishing tap. 2 deep split cedar. 2 shallow invited wind. Snow melted from their boots into dark circles on the floor each evening. By December 15th, the final ridge shingles were in place. Sylvie stood in the lane after Earl left and watched sleet strike the north roof. Nothing entered. In January, the chimney began shedding itself. Small brick faces flaked away beneath her fingers, and mortar between several courses had turned to pale powder. Sylvie swept loose material from the joints with a stiff brush, then mixed hydraulic lime mortar with fireclay for the hotter interior repairs, roughly 3 parts lime mortar to 1 part fireclay where the flue demanded greater heat resistance. She worked only small sections at a time. The days stayed mostly in the 20s. Every 15 minutes, her bare fingertips went numb enough that she had to climb down, hold them near the stove, and wait for feeling to return. Gloves protected her skin but dulled her touch, and some of the joints were too narrow to pack cleanly without fingers. The work took 3 weeks. She removed only bricks that could no longer carry weight, replaced them with salvaged hard-fired brick from a collapsed partition, and tooled each mortar joint slightly concave so water would shed instead of sitting. Near the roofline, she rebuilt the most damaged corner in 6 courses. Then she waited. Late in January, on a morning when frost silvered the inside edges of the windows, she lit a test fire. A handful of kindling first, then 2 oak pieces. She walked outside. Smoke rose vertically from the chimney cap for several feet before the wind bent it east. No smoke escaped the masonry. Inside, the stove drew clean. Sylvie rested one hand against the warm brick beside the thimble. It held. The floors came next because winter had taught her exactly where every splinter lived. Most of the original white pine planks could be saved. A few rotten sections near the back wall were replaced with boards Warren found stacked in his father's storage shed, close enough in age and width that they did not look new once fitted. Where old nails had failed, Sylvie used hand-cut rosehead nails, setting them into existing patterns rather than making bright rows across the floor. She rented Warren's random orbit sander for $14 a day. The first pass, 80 grit, removed grime and the worst raised grain. The second, 120, softened the scars without erasing them. The third, 220, brought the surface quiet beneath her palm. She vacuumed twice before the first oil coat. Then she waited. A second coat followed the next day. The third went on thin. 48 hours of cure time felt longer than the sanding. The boards changed slowly from dirty brown to dark honey, then deepened toward mahogany where old resin had remained in the grain. Scratches, burns, and black crescent marks from dropped hoops stayed visible. Sylvie left them. One morning in late January, she woke before dawn already exhausted. Nothing had broken. No bill had arrived. No memory had returned more sharply than usual. Still, she could not pick up a tool. She walked to the marsh instead. A great blue heron stood in shallow water where the ice had opened, perfectly still, except for one slow turn of its head. Sylvie sat on a fallen log until noon. She did no work that day. The following morning, she finished oiling the back room. February belonged to glass. There were 8 windows in the Cooperage, 3 with no glass remaining, 4 with cracked panes, and one old hand-blown pane warped enough to bend the walnut branches outside into wavering lines. A scratched note in the frame dated that pane to 1788. Sylvie preserved it exactly where it was. For the others, she removed failing putty with a narrow knife, cleaned each rabbit, brushed away dust, and laid a thin bedding of DAP 33 glazing compound before setting replacement glass. She rolled the putty between her palms into long cords, pressed it firmly against the pane edges, then drew the glazing knife in one continuous angle so water would shed outward. The first corner looked terrible. She scraped it away and started again. The fourth was acceptable. By the 7th, the line ran clean. Several sash cords had rotted through. Sylvie replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton sash cord, feeding each length over the pulley and tying a figure-8 knot at the counterweight so the knot would seat without slipping into the pocket. She balanced each sash before closing the access panels. The last window faced east. Late one February afternoon, Sylvie pressed the final line of putty beneath the lower pane, wiped the knife clean, and raised the sash 2 inches to test its movement. It stayed exactly where she left it. Outside, a chickadee landed on a bare walnut branch. The bird cocked its head toward the glass. Sylvie stood still with the glazing knife in one hand. For a moment, neither moved. Then the chickadee flew toward the creek. Sylvie lowered the sash gently until the latch met. By late February, the walls began asking for patience. Much of the original plaster had fallen away from the hand-split oak lath, exposing narrow strips blackened by a century of dust. Sylvie's first 3 patches near the chimney failed for 3 different reasons. One cracked because the base dried too fast, one sagged because she had laid it too thick, and one simply released from lath she had not dampened enough. Warren brought her an old paper sack from his storeroom. "My father kept horsehair," he said. "The fibres were clean, dry, and surprisingly strong." Sylvie mixed lime plaster in small batches, folding in chopped horsehair until the mortar held together when lifted on the trowel. She pressed the first scored scratch coat through the lath so it formed keys behind the wood. The second, a 3/8-inch brown coat, cured for 72 hours before she touched it again. The finish coat went on 1/8 inch thick. She worked by lamplight near the chimney, smoothing the final patch without trying to make the old wall perfectly flat. These patches will hold another 100 years. She did not say it aloud. Doris May began leaving paper bags on the doorstep. The cafe owner was a broad woman with flour permanently caught in the crease beside her left thumb. The bags held biscuits, boiled eggs, sometimes a slice of ham wrapped in wax paper. Sylvie tried to pay. Doris pushed the coins back across the cafe counter. That was the entire bargain. Caleb Voss arrived one Saturday on a blue Schwinn bicycle with a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 16, all knees and wrists, with a cowlick that refused his wool cap. He split 2 weeks of oak kindling before Sylvie could stop him. When she offered money, he shook his head. My mother said, "About your grandfather." He looked embarrassed after saying it, as though he had disclosed too much, and went back to splitting. Reverend Boyd passed every morning on his walk from the parsonage to the small Methodist church. He had a silver moustache and wore the same brown felt hat regardless of weather. He never came inside uninvited. At the lane, he simply tipped his hat. One morning, after a night of freezing rain, he paused beside the walnut trees. 4 words. Then he continued toward town. Sylvie postponed the cellar until February 11th. The stairs had been buried beneath broken shelving, plaster fragments, and 2 collapsed barrels. Once cleared, 7 granite steps descended to a 12 by 15-foot room with a fieldstone floor and walls thick enough to hold winter cold without frost. At the centre lay a dressed granite slab. Unlike the rough floor stones, its edges had been squared. A Cooper's mark had been carved into its face, 3 hoops crossing 2 curved stave lines. Sylvie brushed away the grit. She did not lift it. Under the 3rd granite step, however, something caught the broom. A small oak box had been wedged deep into the gap. Inside was a brass key. Its bow had been shaped like a tiny barrel hoop. Beneath it lay a tintype wrapped in linen. The photograph showed a young woman standing outside the same cooperage in the summer sun. She wore a pale blouse with rolled sleeves and held a Cooper's draw knife across both palms. The resemblance stopped Sylvie's breathing for a moment. The woman had her narrow chin, her eyes, even the slightly uneven line of the eyebrows. Sylvie turned the tintype over. Clara Mercer, daughter of Jacob. Age 25. Summer of 1903. Sylvie carried the key upstairs and set it on the mantel beside Jacob's lamp. She did not know what it opened. She left it there. March loosened the land. Snow withdrew first from the south side of the cooperage, then from the walnut roots. The creek grew loud enough at night to hear through the restored windows. By April, green catkins hung from the walnut branches and yellow pollen gathered along the sill. Sylvie did not begin a full rain barrel that spring. She knew enough now to understand how much she did not know. She chose $1 silver from the cash to exchange for materials, then bought scrap white oak, a length of mild steel hoop stock, and sharpening stones. She practiced only on short staves and small tubs, learning where grain resisted and where heat made it willing. The house was patient. So was she? 2 winters later, in December 2024, Sylvie finished her first full wet coopered rain barrel. She had ruined 11 practice assemblies before it. Some leaked at the crows. 2 opened at the bilge when the oak dried. 1 twisted so badly under the windlass that she dismantled it before the final hoops were driven. The 12th stood 30 inches across at its belly. Made from straight-grained white oak she had air-dried beneath the cooperage eaves. She heated the raised shell gradually, sponged the inner faces, and tightened the windlass a little at a time until the staves closed without tearing grain. Then she drove the steel hoops, not hard, evenly. She filled the finished barrel with water and marked the level in pencil. By morning, the mark had not moved. Sylvie laid her palm against the damp, cool oak. No applause. No witness. Only a barrel holding what it had been made to hold. The cooperage itself had changed just as quietly. The north roof ran straight. Lime-plastered walls reflected lamplight softly rather than brightly. The white pine floors still carried old burn marks and black crescents from vanished hoopwork. 8 windows opened and closed. Jacob's lamp remained on the office counter, while Eleanor's letter rested in a cedar-lined drawer Sylvie had built beneath it. The original 1788 pane stayed untouched. On certain mornings, it bent the sunrise. The brass key waited nearly another year before revealing its purpose. Sylvie noticed the lock by accident. A summer storm had split a dead branch from the eastern walnut, exposing a narrow iron plate set into the trunk decades earlier and nearly swallowed by bark. At its centre was a keyhole. She brought the brass key from the mantel. It turned once. Behind the plate was a shallow copper-lined cavity. Inside lay a folded 48-star American flag, carefully wrapped in oilcloth, and a single note dated September 26th, 191 or 911 what? The handwriting belonged to Clara. Henry has been gone 3 weeks now. Mother says grief is private, but work never is. The hoops still have to be driven evenly. The barrels still have to hold rain for people who will never know which hands made them. I have folded Henry's flag here because I cannot bear to keep it beside the bed, and I cannot bear to put it where strangers will throw it away. Someone after me may be steadier. If you find this, take it into daylight. Remember him without making a shrine of sorrow. Then go back to your work. Sylvie sat beneath the walnut tree until the afternoon shadow crossed the Cooperage wall. The medal found inside the steel hoop bore Henry Bell Mercer's name. On November 11th, 2025, Sylvie carried it with the folded flag to Springdale Cemetery in Peoria, where records helped her locate the Mercer family plot and the memorial inscription placed there for Henry after his death overseas. She did not arrange a ceremony. She brought a small white oak cross she had made by hand. She stood there alone on Veterans Day while dry leaves moved across the grass. Then she went home. The money remained mostly untouched. Sylvie used only 4 coins from the original cash. One paid for the first practice oak. Another bought the steel for her initial hoop experiments. A third covered replacement glass she could not salvage. The fourth purchased a used hand-cranked stave jointer from a farm auction outside Canton. Everything else remained sealed. Not inside the old hoop. Sylvie built a new compartment beneath the office floor, lined it with cedar, wrapped the remaining currency, coins, letter, and technical notes against moisture, and placed a new envelope on top. For the next one, the shop reopened without a sign in a newspaper. Doris pinned an index card to the corkboard beside the cafe register. The first order came from Earl Voss for a small garden barrel. The second came from a woman who wanted a leaking family cider cask repaired rather than replaced. By autumn, more than 40 names had collected on a handwritten mailing list. Sylvie accepted only as much work as she could do without rushing. Some customers waited months. Most agreed to. Caleb returned in early spring, carrying a long object wrapped in an old quilt. He was taller by then and had traded the Schwinn for a rusted pickup, though the same cowlick still escaped beneath his cap. "What did you make?" Sylvie asked. He unwrapped a hand-carved oak sign. The lettering followed the weathered style of the original board above the loading doors. Mercer, Rain, Barrel and Cooperage Works. Beneath it, in smaller letters, Caleb had added. Sylvie ran her thumb across the carved ampersand. "You spelled something wrong," she said. Caleb stared at the sign. "No, I didn't." He shrugged. She looked toward the workroom. 2 young girls from town had begun coming on Saturday mornings to sweep shavings and practice reading grain on scrap oak. Doris's niece could already sharpen a draw knife well enough to raise a clean curl. Another girl kept a notebook of measurements and refused to round fractions. Sylvie looked back at the sign. Caleb grinned. That afternoon, they mounted it beneath the old one. Years had erased much of the original paint. The new words were easy to read. On the longest night of that winter, Sylvie sat at the office counter with Eleanor's letter open beside her. She took out a clean sheet of paper. For several minutes, she listened to the stove and the small winter sounds of the building. Then she began, "My dear one, whoever you are." She wrote that she did not know when the letter would be found. She described the hidden floor compartment without giving its measurements too easily. She recorded how to judge white oak by ray fleck, how slowly to bring heat into a raised shell, and how to stop tightening when the grain began speaking in small dry clicks. She wrote down Warren's name, Doris's, Earl's, Caleb's, not because future hands needed a history lesson, because no craft survives through tools alone. Near dawn, Sylvie stopped writing and walked into the workroom. The first barrel she had completed stood beneath the restored rafters collecting winter roof water from a copper downspout, each stave pressed against the next. None could have held the shape alone. She rested one hand on the upper hoop. Strength does not lie in each stave, but in the steel hoop that binds them together under pressure. Outside, snow began covering the lane. Inside, Sylvie folded her unfinished letter once and placed it beside Eleanor's. The oak rain barrel Cooperage waits. It has always waited. Years later, Martha Bell would retire from the county office. When her replacement emptied the old desk, he found a quarter in the back corner of the top drawer, dull with age and pressed beneath a yellowing transfer receipt dated December 2022. Martha took the quarter from his palm. "No," she said. She opened the drawer again and placed it exactly where it had been. Then she closed the desk.